Everyone remembers Toothless as the lovable dragon who couldn't stop acting like an oversized cat. The playful ear wiggles, the goofy smile, the head tilts, the awkward mating dance. But go back to the very first time we ever saw him. He's almost a completely different creature, silent, invisible. His glowing green eyes are the only thing you can see before an entire Viking village erupts into flames. He isn't cute, he isn't funny, he's terrifying. So, what happened? Did DreamWorks simply make Toothless cuter because fans loved him? Or was something much bigger happening behind the scenes? Because the truth is, DreamWorks quietly changed Toothless across all 3 movies. Not just his design, his face, his personality, the way he moved, even the way he looked at Hiccup. And once you realize why they did it, you'll never watch the trilogy the same way again. Because Toothless didn't change by accident. He changed because the story needed him to. Let's go back to the first movie, before Hiccup ever touched him. Before forbidden friendship. Before Toothless became the king of dragons. DreamWorks had one job: make the audience fear him. Think about Hiccup's first encounter. He isn't introduced flying proudly across the sky. He's hidden, a ghost in the darkness. Nobody has ever seen a night fury and lived to describe it. Even Stoic, the greatest dragon hunter on Berk, only knows one thing about him. If he exists, that's terrifying. DreamWorks wanted Toothless to feel less like an animal, and more like a legend. Everything about his design supports that. His body is sleek and almost panther-like. His movements are cautious, controlled. He watches before he attacks. Even when Hiccup traps him in the forest, Toothless doesn't immediately lash out. He studies him, calculates him, like a predator deciding whether something is worth killing. And that's exactly what the filmmakers wanted. Behind the scenes, the animation team built Toothless using predators as inspiration. Black panthers, birds of prey, even creatures like axolotls for some of his stranger qualities. The goal wasn't to make viewers think, he's adorable. It was to make them think, I don't know what this thing is. Because Hiccup doesn't know either, and neither do we. But then, everything changes. Not because Toothless changes, because Hiccup does. The moment Hiccup puts down the knife, the story stops being about defeating a dragon. It becomes about understanding one. And from that point forward, DreamWorks slowly starts changing how we see Toothless too. Not all at once, so slowly. Most people never noticed it happening. Here's the clever part. DreamWorks didn't begin by changing his body. They changed his acting. Look closely at Toothless during the first movie, especially after he and Hiccup become friends. His ears begin reacting like a curious cat. His head starts tilting whenever he's confused. His nose twitches. He blinks differently. His expressions become easier to read. None of those moments are random. Director Dean DeBlois has explained that the team spent time watching videos of cats and dogs, borrowing little behaviors people already loved without even realizing it. The idea wasn't to turn Toothless into a pet. It was to make audiences subconsciously recognize him. Because the fastest way to connect with an imaginary creature is to remind people of a real one. Suddenly, that terrifying night fury starts behaving in ways that feel strangely familiar. When he's curious, he leans forward like a cat. When he's excited, his ears perk up. When he's nervous, he hesitates exactly the way an anxious dog might. You stop seeing a monster, you start seeing personality. And that's an incredibly important difference, because audiences don't cry over impressive creatures, they cry over characters. But if you think that was the biggest change, it wasn't. The biggest redesign wasn't hidden in Toothless's wings, or his scales, or even his body. It was hidden in the smallest part of him, his face. To most viewers, Toothless always looks like Toothless, but the animators knew something the audience didn't. Tiny facial changes could completely transform how he felt. Lead animator Dane Stogner once explained that Toothless's face was incredibly delicate to animate. A slightly different eyelid angle, a different ear position, a tiny change in his nostrils, even the size of his pupils, could make him look adorable or frightening. The exact same dragon could switch from apex predator to best friend without changing a single scale. And the team used that constantly. When Toothless is relaxed, his eyes become wider, his pupils grow larger. Sometimes they even let him become just a little cross-eyed because it made him look surprisingly cute. But the instant danger appears, everything reverses. The pupils narrow, the eyelids lower, his teeth become visible, his ears pull back. Within seconds, the playful companion disappears, and the Night Fury returns. That's why Toothless always feels believable. DreamWorks never replaced the Predator. They simply taught him when to hide it. And by the second movie, they were ready to change something even bigger. Not just how Toothless looked, but what kind of animal he had become. But here's where the story takes an even more interesting turn. By the time How to Train Your Dragon 2 begins, 5 years have passed. To Hiccup, Toothless isn't a mystery anymore. He's family. And DreamWorks realized something. A dragon that spends 5 years living beside a human shouldn't behave like the same animal we met in the forest.
So they quietly changed him again.
This time, not by making him weaker, by making him warmer. One of Toothless's lead animators later revealed something fascinating. For the first movie, the team leaned heavily on cat-like behavior because cats are independent, cautious, and unpredictable, exactly what Toothless needed to be. But by the second film, they intentionally pushed him closer to a dog. Not literally, emotionally, he becomes more openly affectionate. He celebrates with Hiccup, he plays, he jokes, he nudges him for attention. He reacts before Hiccup even finishes speaking. Without realizing it, audiences stopped seeing Toothless as a dangerous wild dragon and started seeing him as Hiccup's lifelong companion. The dragon hadn't lost his wild side. He'd simply learned trust. And that's exactly what Hiccup had spent 5 years teaching him. The story had changed. So Toothless had to change with it. But DreamWorks wasn't only changing how Toothless behaved, they were also changing how much he could act. Between the first and second films, the studio introduced a powerful new animation system that gave artists far greater control over facial performances and subtle body language. That sounds like a technical upgrade, but it changed something much more important. It changed emotion. Instead of relying on broad movements, animators could create tiny performances. A slower blink, a softer smile, a hesitant glance, a barely noticeable ear movement. Moments so small most viewers would never consciously notice them, yet somehow feel them. Toothless wasn't becoming more expressive because the old version was broken. He was becoming more human without ever stopping being a dragon. And that's a surprisingly difficult balance. Push too far. He becomes a cartoon. Stay too realistic. He becomes emotionally distant. DreamWorks spent years walking that line. Then something happened that almost nobody knows. The fans noticed, not everyone. Only the people who had watched these movies dozens of times. Some fans spotted tiny new bumps along Toothless's jaw in the second movie. Most people ignored them. Superfans didn't. They started wondering if these small changes meant Toothless had grown older. The theory spread through the fan community. And then something remarkable happened. One of the supervising animators saw those discussions. Later in the film, Valka specifically points out that Toothless is the same age as Hiccup, quietly reinforcing the very interpretation fans had come up with. It's a tiny moment, but it reveals something incredible. DreamWorks wasn't just shaping how fans understood Toothless. For one brief moment, the fans helped shape how DreamWorks told his story. Then came the hardest challenge of the entire trilogy, the hidden world. Most people think this movie is about dragons leaving. It isn't. It's about Toothless growing up. Think about what the story suddenly asks him to do. Fall in love, lead thousands of dragons, choose between two worlds, and eventually, leave his best friend behind. The terrifying creature from the first movie couldn't carry that story. The audience needed to believe that Toothless wasn't simply following Hiccup anymore. He was making his own choices. So DreamWorks leaned even further into expression. The awkward courtship dance, the playful smiles, the nervous excitement, the embarrassment, the joy. For the first time, Toothless isn't learning how to trust. He's learning how to live without Hiccup. And because we'd spent 3 movies watching him slowly become more emotionally readable, We understood exactly what he was feeling, without a single word. But the real proof that all of this was intentional came years later, when DreamWorks brought Toothless into live action. Suddenly, the artists faced an impossible question. How realistic can Toothless become? Before he stops feeling like Toothless, early experiments pushed him closer to a real reptile, more natural, more animal, more believable. But something disappeared: the charm, the personality, the connection. The filmmakers eventually realized the same thing audiences had unknowingly experienced for 15 years. Toothless doesn't work because he looks like a real dragon. He works because he behaves like someone we already love. So even in a much more realistic world, they protected the things that mattered most: the expressive eyes, the recognizable face, the emotional performances, the little behaviors that made millions of people forget they were watching pixels. Because changing those would mean losing Toothless himself. And maybe that's the real story. DreamWorks didn't quietly change Toothless because the original version wasn't good enough. They changed him because every chapter of his life demanded a different version of the same character. The dragon Hiccup feared, the friend who learned to trust, the partner who learned to love, the king who learned to let go. They're all toothless, but each one is slightly different from the last. Not because DreamWorks forgot who he was, but because they understood something every great storyteller knows. Characters who never change don't stay with us forever. Characters who grow do. And maybe that's why the ending of The Hidden World still makes so many people emotional. It isn't simply because Toothless flies away. It's because, without ever realizing it, we'd spent 3 movies watching him grow up alongside Hiccup. DreamWorks didn't just teach Toothless how to become more expressive. They quietly taught us to love him a little more with every film. And by the time it was finally time to say goodbye, it already felt like saying goodbye to an old friend. So, now I want to hear your opinion. Do you think DreamWorks intentionally evolved Toothless throughout the trilogy? Or did the character naturally change as the animation technology improved? Let me know your theory in the comments. If you enjoyed this video and want more hidden how to train your dragon secrets, hit like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.